as Austin with this week's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz, coming to you live from the Business Radio X studios in Tempe, Arizona. Today on the show, we have Mollie McGlocklin, the creator, owner, and lead behavioral change coach at Sleep is a Skill. As I mentioned, I'm here in the studio in Tempe, Arizona. Landon is at the Mance family compound in Dana Point, California. And I believe Mollie is coming to us from her podcast studio in Las Vegas, Nevada. Welcome to the show, everybody.
Thank you so much for having me. So appreciate being here.
Yeah, we're excited to hear your story. But before we jump in, let me just kind of give a breakdown of what we do here at Tycoons of Small Biz. If you're listening for the first time and you're not aware of what we do, we are a program put together by small business owners for small business owners. And it's our intent to put out there content that helps small business owners to be elevated throughout the country. We believe that the small business owner is truly the backbone of the American economy, and Landon and I are small business owners as well. And we come from a line of small business owners and believe that it's really an important thing to make sure that small businesses get their fair share of content and notoriety throughout the internet and anywhere else we can get it. So we're excited to host the show. And as mentioned, Mollie McGlocklin, I'm going to call you the Sleep Queen. So hopefully that sticks and you can use that from now on. But we're excited to have you on the show and tell a little bit about yourself. So before we jump into what Sleep is a Skill is and what it is that you do day to day, why don't you kind of back up a little bit? Tell us a little bit about you personally. Where did you grow up? You know, what was your family life like? Are you married today? Do you have any children? Whatever you'd like us to know about you personally, and then we'll jump into the business side of things.
Awesome. Well, what a great forum that you've created to kind of share information for other small business owners and beyond. It's really fantastic. So I'm grateful to be here. So having said that, my background is I was originally from Maine, very, very small town. Grew up not a lot of money, kind of was the big goal was to get into the city or, kind of venture outside of Maine. Went to school at Syracuse University, just as cold as Maine, I guess you could say, and then went from there to New York. And part of my journey in New York was really the impetus behind the now creation of Sleep is a Skill. But the journey to that was as a serial entrepreneur, burning the candle at both ends for many years, and a lot of sort of maladaptive health behaviors. And certainly I can go into that as we touch on sleep, but, really saw what the stress of being a business owner can look like, and certainly how much that can influence your, well-being and your experience of life. So certainly had the roller coaster experience then, but now on the other side of it, really grateful for that opportunity or for that period to then create the opportunity to, build what I've built now.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. So a couple things I have to hone in on, just because my family and I have, we were planning to go at the beginning of August to Denmark, Sweden, Germany. COVID is still kind of an issue, and American Airlines is canceling a lot of flights. And so we've decided just to wait until next summer to make it a little easier on families. So we've switched to the Northeast as an option. Mainly because one of my wife's college roommates lives outside of Boston, but they're renting a cabin in Bar Harbor, Maine.
Oh, no way.
Yeah,
nice.
You gotta tell me how close you are to Bar Harbor, Maine, and whether or not we should really try to get there.
Well, so it's so funny because often when I speak to people, they'll say, oh, Maine, like, the lobsters, the lighthouse, the Bar Harbor, beautiful, just like amazing. Really, I think what you think of, it's known as vacation land, Maine. It's on the license plate. It's the whole thing. And that's what you think of is, the coast. I was inland. It's like the difference between, I don't know, like Albany and New York City or something. So definitely mine was a little less picturesque. But also I shouldn't totally say that because it's a whole different type of picture. So very mountainous, trees galore, it's just a different scene than I think maybe we might conjure up when we think of Maine. But certainly, so my experience of Bar Harbor was still a bit of a drive for us, and our finances didn't always growing up lend itself to much coastal time. But when we were on the coast, it was amazing. And so now in my adult years, I've gone back a little bit and still want to explore more. But absolutely, if you have that opportunity, check it out for sure.
All right. Good to know. So basically, like the difference between the Mance family compound in Dana Point and say Bakersfield.
Yes, there you go. There you go. That's me. So not so glamorous.
Gotcha. Well, so let's jump in there and tell us a little bit about sleep as a skill. So I know you've got kind of a history. So tell us your history specifically and how you got into this. And I'm going to tell you that I'm going to be very interested in this. I sleep pretty well. My wife struggles. My wife is going through menopause at a young age. I'm not sure she wanted me to say that on on radio, but she had some health issues that caused her to have a full hysterectomy, and so she's in menopause at 47, and it's causing her some problems from a sleeping standpoint. And then I have a daughter who's really having some major sleep issues due to some concussions that she had from being on the swim and dive team and having some accidents there. So I'm very intrigued by the story and what it is that you do specifically, but tell us your personal story and what led you to kind of starting this journey.
Yeah, well, one, I definitely acknowledge you, and it's great for sharing that about what's happening for your wife and for your daughter, because it's so common. I mean, it's just really incredibly prevalent, and that's part of my story. So my background was that I shared of the stressors living in Manhattan and with the companies that were running there. My fiance and I both kind of serial entrepreneurs, and he even longer term than I had been. And so going through that whole period, lots of stress, lots of anxiety, wasn't noticing some of the ways that my behaviors, my management of my life and my stress levels and my sleep were impacting my health. So I started getting sick more often. Those anxiety levels went up, hormonal imbalances, more painful periods. I don't know if we talk about that here, but and then also, even things like I got the beginnings of an ulcer, I had shingles, and my late 20s, like just there's all of these things that were pointing to, something's up. And then it was really when I went through that period of insomnia while traveling, that it became something that could not be ignored anymore, because my experience of life really felt like it was at a standstill when I couldn't really get that sleep that certainly we need to be productive, but also just for your experience of life absolutely shifted. And it was really one of my biggest rock bottom periods in my life. It was, all things, because this often doesn't come out of a vacuum. There's a lead up. There's a lot of things that you missed along the way. And then that was the kind of, the symptomology that I experienced, was that really what felt like this inability to sleep. And so at its worst was when I was in Croatia with Google Translate, and I go into the doctors and I'm like, help, I can't sleep. And I'm laughing or like light about it now, but at the time it was just like, what do I do? Where do I go? Like, a big question mark and, mystery. So I went to the doctors there, and they just sort of looked at me like, well, and, they meant well, but they were busy. They had a whole, tons of people coming. And so then I walk out with their version of Ambien, and then I end up we were traveling. We had a whole lineup of things that we were supposed to be doing. And one of the next places that I get to in Budapest was then, so I went down this line of different medicine pills that they gave me. So different, so it was Ambien, it was Xanax, and it was Valium. And all three of those, that's a particular path. And so in that moment, it was very, very scary from a perspective of, is this my life? Is this what's ahead? Am I going to be dependent on something to do something that presumably should be so natural. And so that really sparked this whole, what felt like this, urgency to get this all figured out. So that was what began this kind of quest and going down the rabbit hole. Worked with tons of different people, spent a lot of money, spent a lot of time to really understand what was going on here. And then over time, when getting it back to that level of homeostasis with my sleep, which I shared wasn't even that great, it was then, okay, now that sleep is back, but like, what could we do to even from that point optimize? That was a whole new world to play in. And then from a quantifiable standpoint, bringing in technology to really measure my results with sleep. And then once I was able to really transform that area, my whole life changed. So I started, just organically working with people one-on-one, small groups. And then it built into online courses, podcasts, newsletters, and all of these sort of things, came out of that experience. But while it felt like there was no silver lining during the time, it now feels like something that I'm really grateful to have gone through, because it turned my whole life upside down in a really positive way.
Yeah, quite a story you've got there. So give us the timeline on that. I mean, when was that? When you were in Croatia? Fast forward to today, the different steps that you've taken to be where you are today.
Oh yeah. So that was years back. We basically, my fiance and I in 2016 decided, okay, we're going to go travel. We're going to do this digital nomad thing. We're going to take our businesses on the road, but our businesses were really not ready for that. And so okay, so then we get on the road, and then there's stressors, and then there's employees that need to be, eat, and we need to eat, and where are we going to stay, and all these sort of things. So we weren't ready. And yet the experience was we had a one-way ticket. And so we ended up this whole thing happened. The acute experience of that was within the 3-month span of time, and actually got a ticket back to New York to handle all of that, the sleep issue. And so for me, it's forever, etched into, my bones, essentially, the difference, like seeing what life really looks like without that adequate sleep. And then now to see life on a whole new realm that I didn't honestly think was possible for myself. I'd always thought of myself as a lot of labels with sleep, like a short sleeper, a night owl, not great sleeper. Oh, it's in my genes, all of those things, and thought that that's how it was for me. So to now know myself as someone that consistently gets great sleep, rises with the sun, all of these things I didn't think were even in the cards for me.
Yeah, that's inspiring. And it I hope that all of our listeners can learn something about this, because I think that we don't realize just how detrimental that is to all of us, right? All of our energy levels and what's the word I'm looking for? Our ability to be productive throughout the day is so dependent on getting a good night's sleep. I mean, I've read an awful lot about multitasking, and it's really just, it's a myth, right? Like people don't don't actually get stuff accomplished when they're trying to multitask. And I've always considered myself a pretty darn good multitasker, but just in the last 6 months, I realized I'm not as good as I think, because I get halfway through something, and then I move to something else, and then I move to something else. And if my wife's listening, she's thinking about the 3 half-done projects that are in our house right now, because I do start. I'm like, oh, I got a little bit of time to work on that, and then something comes up with work or whatever it is, and you don't get back to it. So, a lot of our life particularly is affected by sleep. So let's break it down a little bit and talk about some of the things that we can do, or some of the things that truly affect our sleep, right? So I'm thinking the things that we eat, whether or not we exercise, how much we move, the temperatures that we expose ourselves to, the sun, the darkness, the devices, how often we're connecting with others, all those types of things. Like, give us a breakdown of how those different types of things, and you don't have to answer all of those, but you can break down, some of those, and how it affects our sleep, and, kind of a base level for all of us to get an idea of what we can do to be better.
Yeah. And I love what you said about the productivity element of things. I work with a lot of high performers and athletes and also a lot of poker players. I think I shared with you that my fiance has professional poker player companies in that realm. And so, even the ability to remain cognitively intact at the table becomes really important, at high stakes and what have you. So that productivity side of things is huge. I have a lot of kind of biohackers that are really data driven, and they'll measure, productivity as it, through certain trackers, and they'll be able to overlay their sleep trackers and see that some of their most productive days tend to trend towards those days where they had sufficient sleep to take on whatever they were taking on. So I think you're making a great point with that for sure. So if you need any more motivation for the why, but assuming that we're all committed to like, all right, no matter where my sleep is at, that we can make a difference, then what can we do about it? Two key frameworks that we utilize at Sleep as a Skill is one, the sleep tripod. So first getting kind of a intake assessment of the sleep tripod. So having workability in, three legs of that. So psychology, physiology, and environment, and getting a sense of if there are certain things that might be more out of alignment than others. And often these are all interconnected, of course, but sometimes people will come in and it's just very clear that certain things are weightier than others, and we might need to tend to those. So meaning like, on the psychological side of things, if there was just a death in the family, if there was, we lost our income or whatever, a series of acute situations or kind of chronic stressors that are commonly just, now become a fabric of what we've experienced life as in the background. And then the physiological side of it, like you were sharing about for your wife, certainly that level of the experience of going through menopause can just be such a clear element that from a biological perspective, there are things for us to be mindful of. And then from environmental, and that leads me to the second framework, the environmental side of it, I think many of us might not even realize how much our environments are impacting our results with our sleep. And, certainly what I shared, continuing to use myself as the example of kind of what not to do. I, was living upside down, kind of like vampire girl for a long time, and, would be waking up late, and then often, might wake up not feeling great or headache or need coffee and, keep all the lights low. And then it's not till later on when kind of come into that, then you're getting sort of your first bright light exposure until later on, again, using this poor example as of what not to do. And then sort of having this upside down rhythm to our circadian rhythm. So we want to flip that. We want to do the opposite of that and kind of live within the rhythms of nature a bit more. So that's where the second framework comes in, and it's known as circadian rhythm entrainment. So it's this concept out of chronobiology, which really is the science of time, that our circadian rhythm really exists on this like spectrum. So there's, on any spectrum, you can slide, to one side or the other, and you can either exist on it in a kind of a stronger circadian rhythm or a weak circadian rhythm. So if we want to, so the circadian rhythm entrainment is all about leaning towards that stronger side and the things that we can do to really entrain it. So top down on that entrainment process, most important is light. So light, I think that's one of the ones that many of us might discount as like, oh, well, yeah, maybe that's sort of important, but we might not really get the gravity of the importance of this one. And if we hear light, we might think of like, yeah, I know, blue light, put away your phone, that sort of thing. But it actually really is so important to begin first thing in the morning. So right when you first wake up is this key window of time to embark on something known as sunlight anchoring. And sunlight anchoring is this process by which you're basically getting outside and getting sunlight into your eyes, consistently, because that will reset your master clock. And it's known as your suprachiasmatic nucleus, directly connected with your eyes, on a consistent basis. So you want to do that ideally with a high level of regularity every single morning. And so even if you're just if you listen to nothing else that I have to say for today, just getting outside outside and getting that sun in the eyes for that period of time in the morning, just start to log the difference that can make in your sleep. Because what seems to happen is this reliable, almost countdown mechanism. By the time that you get that first bright light exposure to a 14 to 16 hour period of time later on, when you'll start to get sleepy later on in the evening. So there's a real kind of cause and effect relationship there. So if you're deciding when to get outside, you might know, oh, yeah, I got to get outside at some point today, whatever. Anchor it towards the first half of the day. So as closely as you possibly can, ideally getting movement during that period too, because that will kind of, it would almost mimic that spike in cortisol that we're looking to cultivate in a healthy sort of sleep-wake cycle. So you want to have that spike every morning. You can, lean into that with something like exercise, food, all of that will help kind of have that, spike. The flip side of light, if light's the most important one, the flip side of that is darkness. And so you want to be tethering your activities a bit more closely to the rhythms of nature as much as possible. I know sometimes people have shift working and there's certain things to consider. So if that is the case, then you want to create your own schedule that has your own day, quote unquote, and your own night, quote unquote. And you want to really live within those things. So the day mode and night mode, and have workability there, and have the light cues be in alignment with that, darkness cues be in alignment with that. The reason that's so important is that melatonin is known as the hormone of darkness. So in order to really produce melatonin consistently, you have to really have that presence of darkness. And many of us just don't even cultivate that. We might not even think about that. Or there's always the presence of some sort of light that we might kind of, oh, it's pretty dark in here. But when you measure it, the lux output in your environment might be a bit too high, and that can be impeding your ability to produce melatonin. And then there's more things down the rung, which I can certainly get into, but I can begin with those things and see if those align for you guys of your experience with sleep, essentially.
Yeah, go ahead, Landon. I was just going to say, the one thing that I definitely agree with and that I've seen in my own life is getting out early and getting some sunlight, right? So my wife and I walk the dog by about 7:30 at the latest each day. And that does allow me to wake up. Like even this morning, I'm getting over a little bit of a sinus infection and I didn't feel great this morning. And she's like, go back to bed. I'm like, well, I got too much to do, first of all. Second, I'll be fine once we get outside, right? She was just filling up the water to head out, to get the dog out. And it's crazy because you spend 20 minutes, 30 minutes walking the dog and you do all of a sudden feel, okay, now I'm awake and I'm ready to go forward with the day.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, and there's a real biological response happening there too. So that light is responsible for a whole cascade of events. So it's basically telling the body what time it is. I mean, the body's pretty amazing in that, I shared on the plus side after my whole sleep breakdown, basically, thankfully down the road, we were able to begin to travel again, like, our original goal. So we did that for about 3 years before the pandemic. And one of the things that we would see when traveling was hopping over time zones, that the body is able to shift. And, we're all so grateful for that we can, go travel to wherever, Hong Kong or what have you, and not be stuck on whatever time zone we came from. So it can learn and it adjusts and it changes, but there's a lag time. There's that very real experience of jet lag. And so if we aren't leaning into some of these things that are so crucial to the workability of this, then we might be missing out on this whole other kind of, experience of life that certainly, like, again, using myself as an example, I'm pretty positive that if I didn't have that happen with my sleep, what's likely is I'd still be living some version of how I'd been doing it before, and not even knowing that it was possible to, feel as refreshed each day. And so I think that can be another point of where the importance of bringing in tracking in 2021 and beyond can be really, really eye-opening, because many people I speak with will say, well, I didn't even think I had an issue with sleep, and then I got a sleep tracker. And so then you start seeing some of those numbers, and we're kind of just at the beginning of some of these tracking capabilities, but they're getting really, really exciting with some of the readouts that we can understand of some of our overall health and well-being. Metrics like heart rate variability is a really exciting one for, it's getting a lot of press because of its correlations with being able to spot things like, COVID and other sicknesses quickly in advance before you even might know that you're getting sick. So there's all these mechanisms that are available to us that tracking can help bring us awareness to, but even just on the basics of sleep diary logging, essentially. So like, what is my consistent time that I'm waking up? What is my consistent time that I'm going to bed? Wake ups, where are they anchored? A number of things that can help us begin to now experience and play with some of these things that we're talking about today.
Well, I'd like to volunteer myself as a subject for you, because I might be like a Frankenstein of like sleep tracking, because I've got 15-month-old twins. And, for the first couple months, they were both premature, but they also both had something called growth restriction. So they were really, really tiny, both of them, when they were born. And so for the first couple months, talking about your body adjusting and adapting. I mean, that was pretty wild. Just, going from sleeping, a solid 8 or 9 hours a night to like, maybe 3. And it was pretty big adjustment to make, but now they're kind of mostly sleeping through the night. But for the last 15 months, we've had trackers on them. So we had a little sock that would go on them, and it would monitor their heart rate and their oxygen levels. And so we would be constantly waking up throughout the night and checking the levels and, checking on them and stuff, because they did have some, minor health issues, related to their lungs. And so, we're finally getting back to normal. And you clearly are an expert in sleep. In the 25 minutes we've been talking to you, I've already, learned probably 20 things. But I would argue that outside of water and food, that sleep is the most important thing to someone's, just happiness and their well-being. So it's, again, I know we're halfway through the conversation, but just wanted to, again, just thank you for being here, because this is such an important topic for myself, for Austin, for everybody that's listening, all the business owners that we serve.
Well, one, I just acknowledge you for it's, not a easy road going through that period of time. And yet, that's something where even the reframe of the knowledge that we are going to be going into this period of time where our sleep is going to be impacted. Often what we're doing is looking back to kind of hunter-gatherer days, ancestral kind of blueprints for how to, within a 21st century kind of environment, how to relate to something like sleep. And there are certain periods in our history where we would know, whatever, we're going into battle, we got kids, there's certain, there's a death, there's something, major stressors, certain periods that we just can almost anticipate that there's going to be a dip in our sleep and our baseline. But then just the connection to ensuring that where possible that we can bring that back up. And it sounds like you're coming back, hopefully, from the sounds of it, to this level of homeostasis. And you're pointing to it often. That's why I think a lot of the clientele that I work with tend to be, often on kind of the 40 and over rung, because, at that point they've, often experienced periods of time where they haven't gotten that sleep. And now they're even more committed to do what's possible to have that happen, to bring that, restore that. So I think you're pointing to some really important fundamental things to bring that commitment to do the things that are important to bring and restore this. And I so agree with you with what you're saying of its level of importance. I often we'll take that same stance that I really strongly believe that sleep belongs as a foundational element. And then, food, exercise, because often we think of those things for well-being: food, exercise, maybe a little, meditation, breath work, what have you. But the forgetting of this foundational element is just so imperative. And I do think sleep is, thankfully, knock on something, I think, starting to go through a bit of a sleep renaissance, if you will, where suddenly there's a bit more conversation about it. We're starting to hear more about it. There's more tech that's, pointing to kind of exposing some of the problems that we're seeing. And there's a real want. In 2020, insomnia was searched more than we've seen it searched in our history of sleep, of tracking of, keyword searching. So there's a want. And now it's like, what do we do about it, essentially?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So talk to us maybe first about, why that's happening, right? So why are so many people searching, insomnia? Why are sleep deprivation rates so high? And then maybe just kind of pivot from there. And, I know that, well, I shouldn't say I know, I believe that it has been proven that lack of sleep can lead to a bunch of different neurodegenerative diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So just talk to us about why are we not sleeping well, and what can that mean to our bodies, in the future? And then what can we do to kind of combat that so that we give ourselves a better chance of not dealing with some of the really serious negative side effects of not sleeping well?
Yeah, great question. So, part of the why, a little convoluted or layered, but if we take it back again to that ancestral element of things, it really hasn't been until Edison, post Edison, we're able to kind of create this 24-hour existence with light. We pointed briefly to how light is so important. It's the heaviest and heavy hitter as far as that circadian rhythm entrainment framework. And there's other ones that we can speak to too, but that one's a big one. And since that kind of breakthrough, then we shifted over and we began to be able to live a 24-hour lifestyle. I've somehow landed myself in two of, the most ridiculous places for that, in New York City and Vegas, for like 24-hour lifestyle options. And yet, so there is that way that we could manage our life. And we see that some of the ill effects of even shift workers, it's listed as a possible carcinogenic by the World Health Organization. Unfortunately, we're really grateful for our shift workers in certain areas. I mean, it becomes really, really crucial element of things. So it becomes really important to look at how we can help that group. But at the same time, there is that reality of the fact that if we do have the optionality, we want to see how much we can live within these rhythms. Now, why even more recently are we starting to see this uptick? So there's a couple thoughts on that. So one, in 2016, the World Health Organization, in certain kind of census reportings, determined that the average person within the West was existing basically within an indoor environment over 90% of the day. And so why that's important, and so like why are we talking about indoor lifestyle if we're talking about sleep, is that the more we're living kind of like these zoo animals indoors, cut off from all of these elements, the more we're devoid of some of these cues that in the past just automated some of this. So, because if we think about how we were living, and by the way, that was in 2016, before a pandemic, before sort of, heavy suggestions to stay indoors as much as you can, all of those things can lead to even more cut offness from these rhythms. So, from that place, what we're looking to do within a 21st century is to align a bit more with some of those cues. So what the cues would have looked like in the past was we would have most likely been living outdoors within nature a bit more, sleeping on the ground or close to it, being much more cold is the thinking, or cooler than the rest of the environment. Even theories on often sleeping with hides or heavy, kind of weighted elements of things, and the speculation that maybe that's why people seem to gravitate to weighted blankets or, question marks on that. But certainly the temperature was clear. In the evening, the temperature would drop because of the absence of the sun. But then when the sun would be present in the horizon, then that would bring about a temperature shift, which is the second most important rung on that circadian rhythm entrainment framework. And so when that would shift, then suddenly that would be a cue to wake up because suddenly it's getting warmer in the environment. Then there's paired and coupled with the presence of light now coming there. And then the secretion of any leftover melatonin would presumably cease when the presence of that rising temperature and the presence of that light was there. Then you had this like really helpful productivity hack because you only had sunlight for so much time. And then, so you get all the work done you needed to get done for the most part. And then when the sun would set, then the temperature would go down and, it was pretty much more or less game over. Maybe build a fire, you would kind of extend the day. That was like the first biohacking. So extend the day a little bit more, but beyond that, you were still linked up with those rhythms and then you would start again the next day. So the missing of that is very clear. And then of course, as many of us know, or many of us are connected to just innately how much we're addicted to some of our, tech, our smartphones, our laptops, our Netflix. The CEO of Netflix talks about sleep being, their biggest competitor. So there's a lot of things vying at our attention. And part of the thing that we're creating in that night mode is a kind of downshifting and down regulating and also a ramping down of also our neurofunctionality to kind of calm and bring us into sleep more easily. But if we're doing all these things counter to that, certainly that can, influence our results. And I can absolutely speak to what you mentioned about the neurodegenerative elements of sleep deprivation too. That's getting a lot of press as well.
So a couple things that come to mind for me. So I have a son that's 21 years old. He just spent 2 years living in Denmark, and he's been back about 6 months. And if you haven't been to Denmark, regardless, Norway, Denmark, Sweden, they're pretty far north, right? So they have issues with the fact that there's either really long days or really short days. And in the winter, the sun comes up about 9 a.m. and it's completely dark by about 4 p.m., right? So really short day. And so what I'm trying to figure out, I guess, is with the short day, that makes sense what you're talking about, where it kind of puts them in that rhythm. They're getting enough sleep. They're doing all that kind of stuff. But, my son had a UV light, and all of the colleagues that he was with there had UV lights in their apartments because most of them over there were Americans and they weren't used to not having enough sunlight throughout the day. And it would cause major depression and all those sorts of things just because it was, even when the sun was out, it was gray for the most part. And so how do we offset that? Because the reality is the studies show that Denmark, the people of Denmark, are either the first or second happiest people in the world. So I guess just philosophize a little bit on that, or what your thinking is on that, or if you've seen any studies about that specifically.
Yes, no, such a fantastic point. I've got a number of clients that are either within that region. I've got, for whatever reason, Sweden seems to come knocking, also Alaska, so different parts throughout the globe that really can struggle because that can be tremendously disruptive, especially to your point for people that aren't kind of quote unquote used to that, and then landing in that sort of environment and how to manage, your day-to-day interactions. So one, with that, then there is this element of concern. So if you are staying there, it becomes really important to manage the same way like shift workers, create that almost like faux pattern for their days. We're aiming to do that in that sort of environment because too much of something can be disruptive to this rhythms. Now, this rhythm that we're pointing to is this 24-hour circadian rhythm that can get thrown off. And the reason that that's so important is that virtually every cell in our body has this kind of clock that's working on. Our organs have this clock that's working on, and also our brain has this clock that we're working on. So if we throw off the timing on these, that can be detrimental. historically, when some of these seasonality changes would happen, our behaviors would often really shift. So when the winter would come, it would be a bit more of a quote unquote hibernation period, and we would be going to bed a bit earlier. We would sleep a bit longer. We might be fasting more often. The ability to tap into certain resources within the environment would change. All of those things, we would have much more of a connection to those elements, and then we would act accordingly. And some of those properties presumably can help stave off some of the ill effects of some of those changes, if that makes sense. So basically, like, if you are in some of those northern environments, you can tap into things like cold thermogenesis. So you can lean into some of the elements of increasing your redox potential by leaning into the energy production that can come from cold therapy. Like maybe you or some of your listeners have heard of the new popularity of Wim Hof, the Iceman, or any of these people that lean into like cold therapy, ice baths. All of those things can often be helpful to kind of offset some of these concerns. But then there are some very real differences that seem to happen in northern parallel environments on the globe. So one of the delineations is a 37th parallel across the globe. On the northern half of that, we see certainly, so if you take the United States, for example, you might see that there's higher risk rates of MS that seem to occur above the 37th parallel versus below. So there's a real, based on your geography, where you choose to live has a very clear impact on your health. And so that's some of the concern in some of those regions of even just purely vitamin D levels, particularly when you get past like October into November, because just the ability for the sun to access you over the horizon gets stretched and it changes, and its intensity is lessened throughout those periods. So you're not tapping into as much of that vitamin D. And so we know when there's a lowering of vitamin D, it's connected with our ability to produce serotonin. So we might feel a little, but serotonin is a precursor to melatonin. So then that can further impact our sleep. So now we're not feeling great mentally and we're not sleeping, and, kind of repeat that for a bunch of days and you got not a good setup. So it becomes even more, I think, important in some of those environments to start looking at our overall health and well-being. I think that's where the tracking can come in. Also tracking of overall health metrics. So blood work, any of these deficiencies that could come up, so that you can really take action as quickly as possible.
Go ahead.
So yeah, so maybe that's a good segue to talk about some of these, serious illnesses that have been linked back to poor sleep habits like dementia and Alzheimer's. And I don't know, just talk to us a little bit about that, please.
Yes. So one really cool thing that we started to discover within the last few years has been this concept of lymphatic drainage. So we might be familiar with lymphatic drainage with an L. Lymphatic drainage with a G is the thinking is that that's kind of the drainage process of the brain while we're in presumably deep sleep. And deep sleep happens within the first half of the night. So if we're not being able to consistently tap into that period of deep sleep, so say we keep having a situation where certain periods of the week we're going to bed much later than we normally would, because our body and our sleep architecture likes to stay on track, it tends to basically lob off that first half of sleep, and that can be lobbing off of that deep sleep. So it tries to keep us on time, essentially. So then when we're consistently having, or it can just be totally, there's no pattern to it. We're someone that we're just on a roller coaster of sometimes we go to bed early, sometimes we go to bed late, who the heck knows? Then that can be really problematic, because then the sleep stage quality and the staging that we're going through can be impacted. So if we're not tapping into that deep sleep consistently, then that ability for the brain to go through that lymphatic drainage is impacted. And so what happens in that lymphatic drainage is basically the brain shrinks just a certain percentage, a small amount, just enough to allow for this fluid to basically rush through and release and to take out any toxic, or basically it's like cellular waste that has been accumulating throughout the course of the day, because just, the living throughout the course of the day is producing this cellular waste. So, and it needs to be flushed out each day. What happens if it doesn't get flushed out? This can be really interesting, and it's, a measurable and visual thing, is that there seems to be this calcification of the brain, and some of these amyloid beta plaques seem to accumulate on the brain if they're not getting properly flushed. So when you look at the brain of someone that's, had a long period of sleep deprivation and all of those plaques, then you look at someone that has, Alzheimer's or dementia, and then looking at some of those plaques, they seem to be very similar. And so that's where a lot more press has been coming out around the correlations and what looks like, certainly correlations and speculation on causation to certain degrees of its influence on upticking in some of those rates of neurodegenerative issues derived from sleep deprivation. So it's gotten a lot of press because for so long it was, all right, well, am I genetically set up to get some of these things? Like, I guess, what do I do? I guess I just hope that I don't get it. Now this gives us, a bit more action to take, but from human behavior, the problem is, we're talking often decades in advance of when things might show up. But even on the short term, I think many of us can point to different times where we've had really poor sleep and just our thinking is absolutely impacted often throughout the next day. And so you think about just, compounding that over many, many years and what that could do for, the health of the brain.
So, I think we can all agree that, if you want to improve your sleep, that you have to understand kind of your own patterns in order to kind of put together some kind of a game plan to improve it. So that being said, I know there's been a lot of gadgets and apps and all kinds of stuff that have been, released around sleep. So maybe kind of talk to us about, what are some that are kind of worth considering and maybe some that are worth staying away from, or just what are your kind of general thoughts on those and how do we utilize them to sleep better?
Yes, great question. So yeah, our company is made to be built on the intersection of technology, accountability, and behavioral change to make that difference with sleep. So certainly we lean into a lot of the technological side of things. So one of them, so I would say even just starting with a tracker, as we've kind of alluded to, and this conversation can be important. Right now, every client that we work with wears the Oura Ring, no financial affiliation with them, but it's just, a really standout sleep tracker right now in the 2021. There's all kinds of new things that are in development, so that might change in, the near future. But right now, that would be one of the recommended places to begin. There's other ones. There's BioStrap. There's the Whoop Band. If you're an athlete, some people lean into that one. Apple Watch has certain elements there as well. And then there's even head-based ones like the Muse or, you can also look at Philips and Dream was one previously. They're kind of shifting their model, but those are some. But I would definitely suggest the Oura to begin on the tracking side of things. Then the second kind of popular stack of things that people that I often work with lean into would be then going back to that circadian rhythm entrainment framework. We talked about light being most important, then darkness. Then the third one is temperature. So, and temperature nestled underneath temperature is, of course, our environmental temperature, but then all these behavioral things that we might do that can influence our body temperature. So from a gadget perspective, things that can cool our bedroom environment, certainly, solid workability within our heating, cooling system in our space, so that we can have it be a difference throughout the course of the day. So warmer during the day, cooler at night, but then aiming to get as cool as you really comfortably can within usually the mid 60s Fahrenheit. And so some people will get something like the Uller mattress cooler. That's something that I sleep on. The 8 mattress is another one if you want the full mattress to be cooling. Bright Beds is a brand new one that I just had on the podcast recently that's getting into hotels and, so different ways that we can have this kind of, a regular thing. So that temperature side of things. Going back to the light part of it, investing in a solid pair of blue blockers to a certain degree can be important, but ideally you want to be shifting your environment so that you're not really having to, be concerned with that, so that it's really, really very dark in your space. So, and that can be pretty affordable. It's pretty much taking out lights for the most part, or bringing in like candlelight or red lights in your space. So Philip Hughes would be another kind of quote unquote gadget that's automated. So you can set it up on a timer on your phone, not even a timer, just automated on your phone. And then those blue blockers, if you are finding yourself in like Target at 9 p.m. or something, and it's very, very bright. So aiming to mitigate some of those ill effects, that can be another one. Also, though, another really big one for influencing our sleep, so nestled underneath that temperature is some of the things that can influence temperature. So one is certainly meal timing and meal type. So continuous glucose monitors are actually a really popular one that I have a lot of clients wear. So if you're someone that often has wake ups throughout the course of the night, taking a look at your food intake and the types of foods you're having. And if you're having instability in those glucose levels throughout the course of the day, that crashing throughout the course of the night can be really common. And so I'll be able to see it with these trackers where people, their glucose is crashing and then they're waking up in alignment with that. Because the response when we have that crash is a bit of a cortisol and adrenaline for the body. And then not only are you awake, but you're like really awake, unfortunately, in that time, that frustrating period in the early morning when we're now just up. So that can be a common one to take a look at and really normalize those levels is an important kind of tracker. And then there are a lot of other ones. So, I've got like, this one's like a red light, red therapy. So photobiomodulation. This one's another red light. I know a lot of people can't see this, but there's a lot of things that you can delve into if you want to go deeper on these topics as well.
Well, for those who are listening, you can actually go back and watch the video on YouTube, our channel, Tycoons of Small Biz. So you'll be able to see what she actually picked up and showed there. So
perfect.
I hadn't heard of the Euler, but by the way, but we do have the 8 Sleep mattress in our bedroom and in our motorhome. So
oh, that's amazing. Look at you riding in style.
My wife swears by it.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it can make a big difference, especially. And then when you have these trackers in the background so that you can see, oh my God, my heart rate lowered as a result of having a cooler environment, it can further just underscore the why of doing these things. Or just, then when I'm asking people often with, say, for instance, the food element of things, often we're looking for people to end their meal timing much earlier than a lot of people might be doing. But when you can see the results quantifiably, that can often fuel the ability to take some of these new behaviors on. So, I love that you're leaning into that. And especially when you start then gamifying all these areas, it can just become so like unequivocal. And then you notice when you're not sleeping on those things, when you're in a new space, just how different the sleep is as a result.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have to adjust, if you're in a hotel, for example, or whatever. So yeah, it does cause some problems. So we are running a little bit out of time. I think what I would like to do is propose that we have you back on in 6 to 12 months. Because as business owners, there's so much stress running a business and building a business that I think this is something that a lot of business owners really, really struggle with.
Yes.
So I think it'd be great to have you back on and talk a little bit more about that. But I also want to have you talk a little bit about what you do from a business standpoint, right? Because
sure.
As I listen to you speak, I think of the old adage that, if you do something that you're passionate about, you never work a day in your life, that sort of a thing. And it's clear that you are passionate about it, but this is also your business. This is how you, take care of yourself financially. So tell us how the business operates. How do people get in touch with you? What do you do for them? And as much, pricing or whatever you'd like to talk about, we'd be happy to have you cover that.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So the model basically is you're landing at sleepisaskill.com. You're filling out a sleep assessment to get a sense of where your sleep is at right now. There's auto trigger email response based on what you put in there for that assessment, and then you can say if you're interested in services or not. And if you are interested in services, you get a second follow-up email with some of the parameters of those services. And we do call out because our price points tend to be, we're a bit on the kind of premium price point side of things at the moment because we do a lot of high touch point, high accountability. So what it has looked like largely is a 90-day course that people basically go through, but it's private. So they're going through, basically built this custom designed platform. And so they go through the platform for those 90 days, but the first 2 weeks are the kind of the getting committed, the why, then going through assessments and that sleep tripod that we're speaking about, then going through education, video modules on, so what is some of this background to lean into this concept of sleep being a skill? If it's a skill, we need to, what's the education element that we're going to lean into? So we go through that. And then they create their circadian crafted day in alignment with that. We're also going through a number of other things. They're taking pictures of their sleep environment, sometimes video of their sleep environment. They're doing something called the sleep sabotagers, 17 areas of life that we're getting kind of a self assessment on and seeing if there's any glaring areas that we need to kind of make some shifts in to bring about, because this is so layered and nuanced because on the sleep side of things, often that entrainment element can kind of handle a lot of things. And if we're dealing with a kind of acute stressors or things that are just really not working in certain areas or relationships or what have you, that sense of control, taking action in that area and having a bit of a structure and a plan can make a difference there. So on that high kind of touch point side of things, they're having weekly Zoom calls and every person has to wear an Aura ring. So we're going over those sleep stats every single week. So we're actually getting to measure the difference that, these new behaviors are having. We're seeing, when they slipped up, when they did great, all those different periods of time. They're also connected on Voxer, on walkie-talkie app. And so we're able to then have further touch points in between. So if anything, if they're not sleeping, they are sleeping, all those sort of things that have interconnectivity. The next thing that we're launching that we have people on the wait list for right now is for a semi-private version of that. So that is, they'll still go through the same course. They'll do all of that. They will have a 90-minute call after they've gone through all of their assessments, and we go through each of that. So that 90-minute call will then be that one-on-one element of things. But every single week we're having a group call. And again, even to join that, they have to have the Aura ring so that we can have kind of a scoreboard, if you will, of where everyone's at to then shift accordingly. And then on that group call every week, then we're making some of those shifts there. So that's been our current model. And then we also have affiliate revenue and sponsorships through, we do a weekly newsletter every Monday for 150, like one or something weeks. So we've been doing that. So that's really been a great place to then deliver, kind of free content. Same with the newsletter, same with the podcast. So between those different kind of sponsorships and affiliates there. And then what's next is leading into writing a book for this further, because we also have different kind of workshops and live events, and kind of, it's been certainly with the pandemic, a bit more Zoom based speaking and workshop engagements, which has been really, that's like a particular way of doing it. And we can layer in some live events as well. So kind of a few different revenue streams at the moment.
Gotcha. Well, it sounds like you're building something awesome, and I look forward to staying in touch for sure. And you'll probably see my daughter on your website. She's really got to figure this out before she heads to college. It's becoming a major stressor for her, and I think she's gonna struggle in college if she doesn't get this figured out. So
Well, I would love, again, our part of our commitment too is that even one of the things that's been fantastic is that weekly newsletter has been sort of like the lifeblood of staying connected with people that no matter where they're at, financial or even levels of commitment, maybe they're just sort of interested in sleep. We put different sleep stats in there and all these different things with, some of the latest articles, studies, but also making sense of it in like a, everyday language, or at least that's the aim anyway. And so that's been fantastic because then we're able to keep this dialogue sort of alive for people that are, just testing things out and want to bring that experimentation element of things there.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. I've definitely agreed with everything that you said. I just don't know if I could bring myself to wear a pair of blue blockers around Target. I mean, Landon makes fun of me for being old already, so I don't know about putting a pair of blue blockers
I
on
know
and
the
walking
cool
around Target.
factor goes way down with those. I know. I'm hoping that eventually it becomes this new, like a reverse world, Twilight Zone. Like suddenly it's like the people that know are wearing the weirdo blue blockers. But also, it's funny. We've been seeing too, we were just back in New York recently and walking around, we're starting to see, you could see the quote unquote biohackers in, even the apartment building. So you see the red lights glowing and, starting to catch on even more so, or the very dim candlelight or whatever. So even if you don't want to wear the blue blockers, because they're not a catch-all. Some people think I can just have crazy light, crazy all this stuff and just throw on these, blue blockers. And really, instead, we want to shift our whole environment so that often we don't even really need to wear them.
Awesome. Well, I've appreciated the conversation. I know Landon has as well. Anything you want to say to close out the show, Landon?
You know what? I've been thinking about this as we've been talking, and we would not be sitting here having this incredible conversation with Mollie if it was not for our great friend and amazing person, Janelle Kennedy over at Alderis Mortgage. She is she's a true connector, and so big shout out to her for making the introduction to you, Mollie. Just a phenomenal conversation, and we are very much out of time, so we got to wrap up. But yeah, we will definitely be circling back with you and having you back on in 6 to 12 months if you'll take us up on that.
Oh, I would love that. And fantastic shout out too to our mutual friend. She's incredible. Someone that even when sending the connecting email sends a video, like so next level. So I was like, oh, I want to start doing that. That is amazing.
Right.
She is, but just effortlessly, so really grateful to be connected with you all hat tip to her. And, absolutely would love to continue this conversation. You guys are really built a fantastic platform. And so I'm very thankful to be a part of it.
Excellent. Well, thank you for joining us, and have a great rest of the day.
Awesome. You too. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mollie.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, proudly hosted by Austin Peterson and Landon Mance. Austin and Landon are comprehensive financial planning professionals specializing in financial, estate, and succession planning for small business owners. Austin and Landon have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, and represent clients in 14 states throughout the country. Join Austin, Landon, and the featured Tycoons live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. right here on Business Radio X and your favorite podcast platform.